I was halfway out the kitchen door with a loaf of brown bread under my coat when the guard's hand closed on my arm. I had been hungry for 2 winters. I had not been stupid for any of them. That was the part that puzzled me later, walking the long stone corridor between 2 men in iron, the loaf still warm against my ribs. I had not been stupid. I had watched the kitchens for 3 nights from the back of the hearth alcove, learning the routes of the scullery boys, learning which steward locked which door. I had taken bread from the Alpha King's fortress 11 times this winter, and no one had laid a hand on me. Tonight, someone had moved the loaf. Tonight, someone had set it on the far edge of the long table, in plain view of the hall, where the high seat could see the kitchen passage. I noticed this. I noticed it, and I took the loaf anyway, because my sister Merlin was 11 years old and had not eaten anything but boiled root since the autumn fairs, and a thinking woman in a fed kingdom and a hungry woman in a starving one are not the same animal. The hall opened ahead of me. Firelight, the smell of roasted boar, the weight of 100 conversations breaking off all at once. "Found her under the kitchen lintel," the guard said, and his voice was loud because the hall was suddenly silent. "Bread, right under her coat." I was 22 years old. I had buried my mother the spring before last, and watched my father walk out into the snow last winter with a hunting bow he no longer had the strength to draw. And I had not cried then, and I did not intend to cry now. I lifted my chin and looked at the high seat. The Alpha King was already looking at me. I had seen him before, of course. Once a year at the harvest census, when he rode the border roads with his banner and his beater and his men. He had never noticed me. He was a head taller than any wolf in his pack, and twice as still, and he sat the wolf throne now with his elbow on the carved armrest and his chin propped on his fist, like a man who had been about to make a different decision before I walked in. He was not, I noticed, surprised. He was the only one in the hall who was not. The beater on his left, a broad man with iron in his beard, leaned in and said something low. The king did not turn his head. He did not take his eyes off me. "Your name?" His voice did not need to be loud. "Ondine," I said, "of the Western Holding, past the second pine ridge." A ripple ran through the court at the Western Holding. I knew what the ripple meant. The Western Holding had been the loudest village last winter, the one whose elder had ridden 3 days to beg an audience about the grain levy. The elder had died on the road home. "You stole bread from my table." "Yes." "You did not deny it." "There is bread under my coat, my lord. There is little I could say that would change that." A noblewoman in the second row laughed. It was the wrong kind of laugh, sharp, performative. The kind a woman makes when she wants the man on the dais to know she is amused on his behalf. The king did not look at her. "Why?" That was the question I had been expecting. I had been expecting it the whole walk down the corridor. I had 3 answers ready and decided on the simplest one before I crossed the threshold. "My sister is 11, I said. "She has not eaten bread since the harvest. Yours bakes more than the whore can finish in a night." "I did the arithmetic, my lord. The numbers favoured me." There is a stillness that is shock. There is a stillness that is offence. This was neither. This was the stillness of 100 wolves recognizing at the same instant that the wrong thing had just been said to the wrong man in the wrong room. The Alpha King set down his cup. He did not slam it. He did not throw it. He set it down with the deliberate care of a man who had just realized his hands were about to do something he had not authorized them to do. The cup made a small, polite sound against the table. The sound was, somehow, the loudest thing in the hall. He looked at the beater. The beater looked back. Some entire conversation happened between them in the space of a breath, and at the end of it, the beater straightened and turned to the guards. "Out," he said. "All of you, clear the hall." The noblewoman in the second row stopped laughing.
"My lord."
"All of you, Lady Mireth." The court began to move. Slowly, then faster, the rustle of court silks and the scrape of benches and the low, confused murmur of 200 people being dismissed from a spectacle they had paid to see. The baiter caught the guard's elbow as he turned to take me with them. "Not her," he said. The guard let go of my arm. I stood alone in the cleared space before the high seat with a loaf of bread under my coat, and the eyes of the Alpha King fixed on me as if I were the only thing in the kingdom he could currently see. He did not, I realized, look angry. He looked like a man who had just been caught. The hall emptied, the great doors closed. The fire in the central pit cracked once, loudly, and settled. I counted 4 breaths of silence and decided that I was not going to be the one to break it. He stood. He was tall enough that standing took a moment. The unfolding of a long, deliberate body that had been holding itself very carefully for a long time. He came down the dais steps. He stopped at the bottom step, which kept 3 paces of stone floor between us. I held the loaf against my ribs and waited. "You did the arithmetic," he said.
"I did."
"What did you find?" I had not expected the question. I had expected anger, or a reprimand, or, in the more optimistic version I had rehearsed in the corridor, a fine I would never be able to pay. I had not expected curiosity in his voice. I had not expected him to look at me as if my answer mattered. 320 loaves a night, I said. The kitchen masters bake to feed your standing guard, and your court, and your visiting delegations. The hall finishes perhaps 200. The rest is given to the hounds in the morning. I have been watching for some time, my lord.
How long?
2 winters. He absorbed this. He did not look surprised by it. He looked, and I will admit I did not understand this at the time, relieved. And the Western holding. Buries someone every fortnight. We did not bury anyone last fortnight. That was an unusually good month. He looked away. He looked away from me into the cooling fire, and I watched a man who had not flinched in front of his entire court flinch in front of one healer's apprentice with a loaf of bread under her coat. He flinched, and he turned his face to the fire, and he stood there for a long count of 7 while I watched the muscle in his jaw work, and worked very hard at not letting my own face do anything at all. "Sit," he said, without turning. "My lord?" "Sit at the table. Eat the bread. I will not have it said I let a starving woman stand in my hall holding food she could not bring to her mouth." I did not move. "My lord,
My sister
will receive a cart of grain from my stores by morning. 2 carts. I am told my arithmetic is unreliable. I would prefer to err in her favour.
There was something in his voice I did not know how to name. Something low and private and old, like a wound that had been bound badly for too long and was being looked at last by a man who knew what he was looking at. I sat. He did not sit. He stood at the foot of the dais with his hands folded behind his back and watched me break the loaf with hands that I would not, I will not, ever admit shook. I lifted the first piece. I set it down.
Eat,
he said. I cannot eat in front of my sister's portion. He was quiet a long moment.
Then I will have the grain on the road within the hour. Eat now. You have my word.
I ate. When I was halfway through the loaf, I found the small wooden thing. It had been baked into the heel of the bread. I did not pick it up at first. I looked at it where it had fallen onto the platter. A small, smooth, carved figure, no larger than my thumbnail. The shape of a wolf with its head turned back over its shoulder. It had a faint shine of oil, the kind a woodcarver gives a piece he has spent a long evening on. I had 8 of them at home. I had 8 of them at home in a chipped clay cup on the kitchen shelf. And my sister Merlin had given them names and stories. And we had never, in 2 winters of bread under my coat, understood where they came from. I lifted my eyes. He was watching me. He was watching me the way a man watches a door he has spent 2 years hoping would open, and never quite letting himself believe it would. And I understood in that moment with a clarity I did not request and could not refuse, what I was looking at. "My lord," I said. He waited. "How long have you known I was the one taking the bread?" "I want you to know that I had not meant to ask it. I had meant to leave the wolf on the platter and pretend not to have seen it. I had meant to thank him for the grain and walk out into the corridor and go home to my sister and the 8 little carved wolves on the kitchen shelf. And I had meant to never come back here for as long as I lived. What I did instead was ask the question. And he answered me.
Since the 2nd time.
The fire cracked again. I set down what was left of the bread. I did not pick up the wolf. If you are still with me, if her voice has kept you this far, stay close. I cannot quite explain what happened next, even now. Subscribe if you would like to hear the rest. I would like you to. I did not see him again for 9 days. I went home. I told my sister there was grain coming. The carts arrived before dawn, 2 of them, just as he had said, and a wheel of cheese I had not been promised, and a sack of dried apples Merlin opened and cried into because she had forgotten what apples smelled like. I did not cry. I gave half the grain to the elder's widow and a quarter of it to the Smith's family, and I sat down on the floor, and I held the small carved wolf in my palm for an hour without moving. 9 days later, a rider came to the door. He wore the king's grey, and he did not dismount.
"You are summoned," he said. "The Alpha King requests your attendance at the Autumn Council as a witness on the matter of the Western holding."
"As a witness?"
"His word, mistress, not mine."
I went. I went because Merlin needed to see me walk into the hall I had walked out of, and walk back out of it on my own feet.
I went because I had 9 years of grain accounting in my head, and I was not going to let it die with me. The autumn council was held in the smaller hall, the one with the long oak table and the long, narrow windows. 12 advisers, the beta. The king at the head of the table, Lady Mireth at his right hand. She had not been there the night of the bread. She had been, I learned later, away at her father's estate for the autumn rites. She had returned to find that the Alpha King had restructured the grain levy of the entire western tier in her absence, and had done it without consulting her father, who was the chief beneficiary of the previous arrangement. She did not, when I entered, look at me at first. When she did look at me, she looked at me with the particular attention a woman pays to a new piece of furniture she has not been told the price of. "Mistress Ondine," the king said. His voice was court voice now, the warm, low, private thing of 9 nights ago folded away somewhere I could not see. "Thank you for coming. The council has questions about the western tier. You will, I am told, answer them honestly." "I will answer them honestly, my lord." "Begin." I began. I told them about the elder who had died on the road. I told them about the fortnight burials. I told them about the boiled root winter and the children who had stopped growing. I told them numbers, heads of cattle, sacks of grain, miles of road, days of frost. I spoke for an hour. Lady Mireth set down her cup. "My lord," she said, "this is moving. It is also with respect. Anecdote. The girl is a healer's apprentice, not a clerk of accounts. We cannot restructure a 5-generation levy on the word of—" "She is 22 years old," the king said, "and she has been keeping the Western Holdings books in her head for 6 winters, because no one in my administration was keeping them at all. I would not call that anecdote, Lady Mireth. I would call it a working record I have failed to ask for." Mireth's face did not move, but her hand on the cup did. "My lord," she said, "I only mean—" "I know what you mean." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. There was a stillness in the room, of the kind that had been in the great hall the night of the bread, and I realized, watching it, that I had now been in that stillness twice, and that the man at the head of the table was the source of it. I also realized that he was not, in the small council hall, sitting in his court voice. He was sitting in a voice I had heard before. A voice I had heard 9 nights ago at the foot of a dais, asking me what I had found in the arithmetic. He looked for 1/2 of 1 second at me. I looked at the table. The meeting ended. The advisers filed out. The beta caught my elbow at the door, gently, and murmured, "Stay a moment, mistress." I stayed. The room emptied. Lady Mireth was the last to leave, and on her way past me she paused, and she smiled, and she said, in a voice low enough not to carry, "He is not the first king to be fascinated by a clever village girl. He will not be the last to remember himself." I did not answer her. I watched her walk out, and I thought about the 8 wolves on the kitchen shelf, and I thought, "He has remembered himself perfectly well, my lady. You are the one who has not." I did not say it. But the king, watching me from the head of the table, watched my face the entire time she passed,
and when she was gone he said, very quietly, "What did she say to you?" "Nothing of consequence, my lord." "Ondine?" It was the first time he had said my name without a title in front of it. I looked at him. "She said you would remember yourself." He absorbed that. He absorbed it the way he had absorbed the burial numbers. Without flinching, without correcting his face, with the long stillness of a man who had already accounted for the cost of what he was hearing. "And what did you think of that?" I considered the question. I considered the carved wolves on the kitchen shelf, and the cart of grain at the Dawn Road, and the loaf moved deliberately to the far edge of a long table by hands that could have placed it anywhere.
I thought, my lord, that you have remembered yourself perfectly well, and that the trouble in the room was not yours.
The corner of his mouth did the thing it had done in the great hall. The small, half-suppressed shift of a man being made to feel something he had decided not to feel. "You are," he said, "going to be very difficult to keep at the Western Holding." "I had not planned to be moved, my lord." "No," he said, "of course you had not." He did not move me. He did not have to. The Western Holding came to court on its own, in the form of 14 petitions and a delegation of 9 elders. And within the moon, I was riding back and forth between the Holding and the fortress, as a translator between accounts that had never spoken the same language. The kitchens left food out for me. The baiter nodded to me in corridors. Lady Mireth did not look at me at all, which was, I knew, worse. I did not see the king alone. I saw him in council and at table, and across the great hall, and twice in the library. Once when he was looking for a book, and once when I am quite certain he was looking for me and pretending to look for a book. The library was where the second loaf appeared. It was set on the reading table beside an open ledger of grain accounts I had been working on, and there was no one in the library when I returned to it after the noon meal, and the loaf was warm. There was a carved wolf in the heel. It was the 9th. I sat at the reading table with the wolf in my palm and did not move for some time. I had decided, over the past several weeks, that the bread had been the work of a kindness he could not name, a gesture from a man who could not allow himself a direct one. The kind of small, soft thing a court king does for years before he can speak the obvious truth aloud. And not, I had told myself firmly, a courtship. The 9th wolf put that decision under some pressure. There was a sound at the library door. He came in. He did not, at first, see me, and I watched him for the space of a breath cross the long room with the unhurried stride of a man whose private library was the one room in the kingdom he expected to be alone in. He saw the wolf in my hand, and he stopped. "Ondine."
"My lord?"
"That was not meant to be the way you found it."
"How was it meant to be found?"
He did not answer.
"How many of these have you carved, my lord?"
He looked at the wolf. He looked at me. "I do not remember."
"You do?"
A long silence. "9, he said. "I have carved 9. I set the wolf on the table beside the ledger, and I stood up, and I walked the length of the reading table until there were 3 paces of polished oak between us. The same 3 paces he had kept at the foot of the dais on the night of the bread. The distance, I had come to understand, that he allowed himself. I closed half of it. I crossed 1.5 paces of polished oak, and I stopped, and he did not move. And I said, "Why did you not knock on my door?" "I had no right to." "You are the Alpha King. You have the right to knock on any door in this kingdom." "Not yours." It was the quietest thing he had ever said to me, and the most direct. And I felt the words land somewhere I had not, until that moment, known I had a door at all. "Why?" I said again. "Because I am the reason your village starved." He said it flat. He said it like a man laying down a weight he had been carrying alone for a long time, and was finally permitting another person to see. The grey levy was my decree. My father had set it lower. I raised it in my 2nd year of rule, against the advice of my beta, on the counsel of Lady Mireth's father, who told me the western tier had 3 full winters of stores in reserve. They did not. By the time I learned they did not, the elder had already died on the road, and you had already begun to take bread from my table. "You knew it was me!" "I had a guard follow you the 2nd time. He reported to me. He continued to report to me. I gave him orders to allow you the bread. I gave him orders to leave you alone." "And the wolves?" "I am not a carver," he said. "I am learning. The first one was a poor likeness. The 9th is, I am told, better." I had been keeping my face composed for the entire conversation. My face decided at this point to stop. He saw it. He took one step. He did not close the rest of the distance. "Ondine, I have spent 2 years carving small wolves for a woman who did not know my name, because I could not bring myself to give her one in person. That is not a thing a king does. I know what it is. I am asking you to know what it is also." "I know what it is." "Then tell me." I looked at him. I looked at him standing at 1.5 paces of oak, with his hands at his sides, and his face doing the unguarded thing it did only in this room. "It is," I said, "the softest thing I have ever heard of being done by anyone, my lord. And the saddest. And the bravest. And I am not going to be able to walk back to the Western Holding tonight as if I have not heard it. I would not ask you to. I am not asking your permission." He smiled. He smiled. The Alpha King of the Iron Territories, the strongest wolf alive, smiled at me in his own library with a carved wolf on the table between us, and I understood, entirely in a single moment, that the man the rest of his kingdom feared was not the man I was standing in front of, and that he had been waiting for 2 winters to be looked at by someone who could tell the difference. I closed the rest of the distance. He did not move to meet me. He let me come. He let me come because the entire point, I understood this as clearly as I had ever understood anything, was that I had to be the one to choose to. When I reached him, I lifted my hand, and I rested it against the back of his, where it hung at his side, and his fingers closed around mine, the way a man closes his hand around something he has been told all his life he was not allowed to hold. "My lord," I said. "Torvald. Torvald." He closed his eyes. I will not, in this telling, describe what passed between us in the next minute. It was not a kiss yet. It was the moment before. It was his forehead resting against mine, and the sound of his breathing slowing, and the carved wolf small and warm in my closed fist between us, and a long, long count of 1, and then 2, and then 10, before either of us spoke. It was, of all the moments of my life, the one I have replayed the most. When he stepped back only as far as he had to. He kept my hand. "There will be a cost for this," he said. "I will pay it gladly, but I will not have you pay it alone." "I know," I said. He did not yet know how soon. Lady Mireth poisoned my water cup 4 nights later at the autumn feast. It was not, in the end, a clever poisoning. It was rushed and angry and reckless, the work of a woman who had felt the ground shift under her in the council hall and had not been able to right herself in time. The cup was passed to me by a steward who did not know what he was passing. I lifted it to my mouth. The beater knocked it from my hand. The cup struck the long table and rolled and spilled, and a hunting hound that had been lying beneath the bench lapped at the puddle before the beater could stop it, and the dog was dead within 12 breaths. The hall went silent. The hall went silent in the particular way it had gone silent on the night of the bread, and I knew, without turning, without looking, that the Alpha King was already on his feet. He did not draw his sword. He did not need to. He looked the length of the table at Lady Mireth. She had stopped breathing. Her cup was still in her hand. The cup was empty. "You will name your accomplice in the kitchens," he said, "and you will name him now." She named him. She named him in a voice that broke twice and stopped once. And the steward she named was taken from the hall before she had finished. And Lady Mireth's father was on his feet by then, and the great hall of the Iron Territories descended into the kind of public political dismantling that I will not, for the sake of the woman I am now, recount in detail here. What I will tell you is this. When the hall had cleared, when her father had been stripped of his honours, when the beater had taken the cup away, and the hounds had been led from the bench, the Alpha King came down the length of the table to where I was sitting, and he knelt. He knelt in front of his entire remaining court. He took my hand, and he turned it over, and he set in my palm the 9th carved wolf, which he had carried in his pocket all evening. "Ondine, of the Western Holding," he said, "I have wronged your village. I have wronged your father. I have wronged you. I am the Alpha King of the Iron Territories, and I am asking you, in front of my pack and my hall, to consider taking the throne beside me. Not because I deserve it, but because I will be a better king with you in this hall than without you. And I am asking you to make me one." 100 wolves witnessed it. None of them, that I am aware, have ever forgotten it. I looked at him. I looked at the carved wolf in my palm. I looked at the place on the wolf's flank where his learning hand had slipped the first time, and at the small, careful smoothing he had done later to correct it. And I looked at him. "You are not," I said, quietly enough that only the front row could hear, "as cold as you think you are, my lord." He closed his eyes. His face did the thing it had been trying not to do. "I know," he said. "You are the reason I know." I told him, yes. The 9th wolf sits on a shelf in my chambers now, beside the 8 that came before it. Merlin has named them. I have not corrected her names. The first one she calls Bread, because she has a sense of history. The 9th one she calls Library, because she also has a sense of romance, and she is 12 now and entitled to one. It has been 6 months. The Western Holding has buried no one this season. Lady Mireth and her family have been remanded to a holding 3 days' ride from the fortress. The beta has, on 3 separate occasions, told me I am wasted as a lunar, and would have made a fine beta. I have, on 3 separate occasions, declined to take this as a compliment. The Alpha King, Torvald, in this hall, in this room, on this page, comes to the library after the evening meal most nights. He reads. He carves. He has improved at the carving. The newest wolf, which is not for me, is for the elder of the Western Holding, who has asked for one, despite having known the family 3 generations, and despite having never asked for anything from a king before. Sometimes Torvald looks up from his work and finds me watching him. He does the thing his face does. I have stopped pretending not to notice. There is a chair at his table that has been empty for as long as anyone in this kingdom remembers. It is not empty now. I do not always sit in it. Sometimes I sit on the floor by the fire with a book in my lap and a carved wolf in my pocket, and I watch the strongest wolf alive try to keep his eyes on his ledger and fail. And I think about the woman who walked into this hall 2 winters ago with a loaf of bread under her coat, and the certainty that the man on the throne was someone she would never need to know. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about almost everything, that woman. I do not, in the end, hold it against her. She was hungry, and she was tired, and she was 22, and she was about to be very lucky in a way she had no instrument for measuring. I had not been stupid that night, but I had been, I will admit it now, slightly less observant than I had thought. Tell me, did you see it coming? Tell me where you are listening from tonight, if her voice has kept you company through 5,000 words of my hardest winter and my best one. Stay with me. There are more stories where this came from. Subscribe if you would like to hear them. I would like you to.